Welcome friends, you're listening to a very special edition of Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. Today is December the 18th, 2020, and it marks the birthday of two very special people. Michael Moorcock himself, and, of course, by cosmic coincidence, my partner Phil. It's also 7 days till Grimbo. So, for that very reason, and we don't need much of an excuse, we can stuff cake in our gobs, drink copious amounts of weird booze, and wish Mike and Phil a riotously happy birthday. And a happy birthday to anyone else out there too that shares today as theirs, or indeed at any point in this or any other future when you happen to listen to this on your birthday by some strange coincidence. Right, on that confusing note, on this show we have a bumper slate. Phil and I will be covering a Moorcock short story that overlaps into one of her big areas of passion, Sherlock Holmes. I'll hook up with long-time Moorcock aficionado and friend of the show, the Pastor, aka Jason, as we look at the appeal of Moorcock and how it crosses political, spiritual and other divides. We'll have some Moorcock-inspired music from Cernus. More on that later. First up though, some messages. Starting with artist and designer of the Breakfast in the Ruins logos and banners, Simon Perrins.
Hi there, I'm looking at the January 1985 edition of Imagine magazine. It's number 22. Just go on page 22. You've got the interview with Michael Moorcock. It's a Michael Moorcock special. Imagine, is Elric you in your younger days? Moorcock. Yes, I think so. A horribly exaggerated and romanticised version of an adolescent. So if my spurious logic holds out, that means not only is it Michael Moorcock's birthday, but it's also Elric's. So happy birthday, both of them.
Hey Mike, this is Jim from Dreaming City Books, wishing you a fantastic birthday and many, many more.
Hi, this is Ralph Lovegrove, and I do a podcast called Fitchplasm, and I'm really honoured to be asked to record a birthday message for both Phil and Michael Moorcock. I hope everyone's had a happy birthday, and that you're all suitably fed and watered and in the best company you could hope for. So I'm going to say a couple of things. First, I came to my favourite fiction in my 20s rather than my teens, which I think is maybe a bit unusual. A lot of Moorcock fans have anecdotes about growing up with them in their teens. In my teens, I was reading the mainstream fantasy like Eddings and the Dragonlance novels, Tolkien obviously, and no disrespect to some of those authors, but not really for me. Most of my fantasy reading was primary world fantasy horror. Clive Barker is a prime example. But at the end of my second university year, I discovered three things I loved. 1970s David Bowie, Tilda Swinton in Orlando, but Tilda Swinton, and Michael Moorcock, which I discovered in the early 90s Millennium Omnibus editions. So I don't want to sound like a gushing fanboy, but this was the first adult secondary world fantasy that really clicked for me, and it's certainly due to the scope of the wider multiverse, this cosmological approach to world building that I previously, I think, only found in horror like Barker and Lovecraft in my own reading chronology. And just an aside, I've started a project to reread the early 90s collections in sequence through the 14 volumes, and as well as the stories, which I know well, each volume has a preface written by Michael Moorcock as well as new art, and I've really enjoyed these as a time capsule and retrospective. But moving on, the other thing I want to mention is the contribution to the British New Wave coming out of New Worlds. And aside from Moorcock, my favourite authors include J.G. Ballard, Christopher Priest, M. John Harrison, John Brunner. I wasn't even born in the 1960s, so I've no idea what that scene was like. All I know about it comes from Wikipedia and the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction, and I'm sure these other authors would have found a way without New Worlds, but it kind of makes sense that several of my favourite authors found themselves in that orbit. So empirically, my own reading has been massively enriched by New Worlds and Michael Moorcock years later, and that's really a legacy worth celebrating too. So happy birthday, Mr. Moorcock, and thank you for everything.
Hi, it's Neil Burton here. Thanks, Andrew, for giving me this slot to say happy birthday to Michael Moorcock. I'm one of the art team, only in Inca, but we tried to do the Chinese Agent in the 80s and we failed to finish it disastrously. But now I'm one of the ones who is trying to shake up the original crew, and hopefully we'll get it finished for Mike's next birthday. All the best. Happy birthday.
Well, here we are. We are back in actual Derry and Tom's, not virtual, because we're both in the actual same room.
We are.
Which is lovely. And it's a particularly special day in Derry and Tom's because it's Phil's birthday.
Hello.
Happy birthday, Phil. You've spent the day opening lots of lovely presents from lots of lovely people. We just got the shit scared out of us just as we were about to start recording because somebody knocked on the front door a few feet away from us, and you got a lovely delivery of flowers.
Absolutely beautiful.
Very nice. But of course, it's not just your birthday. We also know it's someone else's birthday as well.
Absolutely.
Tom Cruise.
And I was going to say, happy birthday, Michael.
Yeah.
Wishing you out, you're having a lovely day as well.
Yeah, happy birthday, Michael, and thanks for everything, as always. Happy birthday, Tom Cruise. Hope you're having a break from shouting at all your crew members and bollocking them all for being not COVID safe.
But at least you're making the next Mission Impossible for me.
Yeah, that's right. You are a Mission Impossible mark, aren't you, babe?
I certainly am.
Yeah, but of course, we're here because it's a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast, not a Tom Cruise flavoured podcast. Maybe that's for next year. Maybe that's for 2021.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And as per last year, the tradition that we established last year, is it tradition? If you've only ever done it once before, maybe we'll make it tradition by doing it again.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to make it tradition by doing it again. So we've had some port and lemonade. We've eaten a load of crisps. We've watched some telly. We've not had our 3-course dinner like we had last year.
No, well, obviously, being in Tier 3, that goes against us, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, lockdown has messed with one element of our tradition, which is to have an enormous slap-up dinner and a couple of bottles of wine, and then go back to our 4-poster room in the Bagdale Hall Hotel in Whitby. Sadly, not this time.
No.
But we'll save that up for next time. But we've chosen a short story again, just like we did last year. But this time, we're sticking with Moorcock. Last year we did The Tower of the Elephant, Robert E. Howard, didn't we?
Yes, which I really enjoyed. The first one I'd ever read by Robert E. Howard. And
Yeah.
I did enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I think we'll revisit Robert E. Howard at some point. But right now, we're back with Mr. Moorcock. And what story are we going to read?
So I'm really excited because I'm an avid reader and I'll read anything and people give me stuff and I love it. But my heart started with Sherlock Holmes. So when Andy suggested Sherlock Holmes story that Michael had written, I was just all over that. And it's called The Adventures of the Dorset Street Lodger.
So apparently this was originally privately printed as a chapbook for David Shapiro and Joe Pigott in 1993 and first collected in book form in The Improbable Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, edited by John Adams for Nightshade Books in 2009. Now, I'd love a copy of that because Nightshade Books are a fantastic publisher. You know all those amazing William Hope Hodgson volumes that have got the beautiful hardbacks with like the gilt design? That was Nightshade Books. Sadly, I only ever got 3 of those. The other 2 go for 300 or 400 quid now.
Hundreds of pounds, yeah.
But they're a great press, Nightshade Books. So yeah, that's what we're going to cover. So why Sherlock Holmes? What is it about Sherlock Holmes that you've always enjoyed so much? Because you are a Sherlock Holmes superfan.
When I was young, I used to love on a Friday afternoon or weekend watching black and white movies. And I think, obviously, we came across a few Sherlock Holmes. I am still a huge fan of Basil Rathbone. And then in the 80s, I mean, my love started then and it just continued. And then in the 80s, I believe it was the 80s with Jeremy Brett, who I thought was a fantastic Holmes. And there has been 1 or 2 good ones since, but I will always remain a fan. Mostly, the ones I've seen have been pretty good. Yeah. Obviously, I love the books as well, but it's always given me an interest in, it's like whodunit, and obviously the way that he solves things.
Yeah, you love your detective fiction all around, don't you?
Massively, yeah. And I think it always started with Sherlock.
Yeah, you get a few things there in Sherlock Holmes, don't you? You get it's a buddy cop drama almost, isn't it? I mean, they're not cops, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's a buddy setup, which makes it interesting because you got the character interplay between the 2 characters, the eccentric and the straight man, they're all, which is a key formula for all sorts of things, including comedy and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And it's right there, fully formed in, I don't know, the 1880s. When did he write them? 1880s, 1890s, whatever it was. It's fully formed and it works and the relationship's really great. But I'm going to put you on the spot. You've mentioned Basil Rathbone, you've mentioned Jeremy Brett, and of course, I think about 3 or 4 years ago we went on a massive summer binge watching loads of Sherlock Holmes movies.
We did.
Ian Richardson.
Yeah.
We watched the BBC series with, half of it was Peter Cushing, half of it was another guy whose name I've forgotten. We watched the...
Michael Caine.
Yeah, the comedy, which I really enjoyed, Michael Caine and Ben Kingsley.
Yeah.
We watched the 7% Solution with Nicole Williamson.
Yeah.
No, I said Nicole Kidman. Nicole Williamson's Sherlock Holmes. We watched the Ian Richardson ones. We watched the Russian ones.
Yeah.
You got the Russian ones on DVD, which were really, really good. Even though it was kind of plainly obvious when you went to 221 Baker Street, it just simply wasn't an English street, but it was still really, really fantastic.
Then there was the American, obviously, with Downey Jr.
Oh, the movies, yeah. Guy
Ritchie.
Guy Ritchie, yeah, I think I blocked them out of my memory. But you quite enjoy them, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're light-hearted.
Yeah.
And obviously then you have Benedict Cumberbatch with the modern take, which again, I kind of didn't mind too much.
Yeah, and obviously not as good as the Johnny Lee Miller one.
Oh, Elementary.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, I can't watch it. I haven't watched any.
Yeah, I think that's Johnny Lee Miller, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, they're really, really bad. Right. Favourite Sherlock Holmes? Go.
Basil Rathbone.
Basil Rathbone, nice. Favourite Sherlock Holmes movie or episode?
Ooh. I do have a huge soft spot for the Hound of the Baskervilles.
Which one? There's been many.
Ooh. Not the Benedict Cumberbatch. That was very disappointing. I'm probably actually thinking, now you've put me on the spot, that I would go for the Peter Cushing's with...
The Hammer film?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the bad guy was...
Christopher Lee. Yeah. Yeah. That is a really good one. It's really super atmospheric.
Yes.
That's another one of the ones we watched that summer. Yeah, okay. I'm going to go slightly... I'm not as big a Sherlock Holmes fan as you are.
No.
There were 2 Sherlock Holmes movies that weren't based on Conan Doyle short stories, which were about Jack the Ripper. There was one with John Neville, which was a little bit staid, but it was all right. But my favourite Sherlock Holmes is Murder by Decree, with Christopher Plummer and James Mason.
Yes.
And it's basically Jack the Ripper and Freemasonry, and I absolutely adore that. I would watch that any day of the week. Okay, maybe Christopher Plummer's not the world's greatest Sherlock Holmes. He's pretty good.
It's okay.
But I'm going to go with Christopher Plummer and Murder by Decree. Yeah, that's my choice. That's my selection.
And I'm sure that everybody out there has got their own favourites for different reasons.
I'm sure they will. And it's just reminded me, I'm looking across the room at the moment at the Russian DVD box set. We never watched them all, and we never did watch the Russian Hound of the Baskervilles, which, strange fun fact, who is the Queen's favourite Sherlock Holmes? The Russian guy.
No way.
Apparently.
Is it?
Apparently so, yeah.
Maybe we should watch it tonight.
Yeah, well, maybe we should. We need a birthday movie, don't we? So after we've done this, because of course, as is tradition, we're going to get another large port and lemonade. And by the way, we haven't toasted, have we, to your birthday? Cheers.
Cheers.
There's the sound, the massive clunk of 2-pint tiki glasses full of port and lemonade.
Yeah. And happy birthday to everybody who shares this special day.
Absolutely.
With us.
Happy birthday to Mike, happy birthday to Phil, happy birthday to Tom Cruise, and happy birthday to anybody else out there who shares today as their birthday. And actually, happy birthday to anybody who happens to listen to this episode on their birthday, whatever day that may be.
Absolutely.
On that confusing note, we're going to take a break and we're going to read The Adventure of the Dorset Street Lodger and come back and have a quick chinwag about it.
Right, I'll see you all soon.
All right, cool. I'll see you again. Well, in a minute. Okay, we're back. We've done our homework. Have you done your homework?
Certainly have, and it was a very enjoyable story, I have to say.
Yeah, you've done your birthday homework. It's terrible me giving you homework on your birthday, isn't it?
Well, it's become the norm.
Well, it has. Done it 2 years running now, so it is now the norm. Expect it for the rest of our lives.
No!
So, anyway, we've polished off our bottle of, what was it? Taylor's Late Bottled Vintage Port 2016, which makes it sound really, really posh, but it's basically supermarket port in it, of the nicer variety.
Of the nicer.
And it was delicious. So, what have you got now?
I have got a Floris Framboise fruit beer.
Okay. And I forgot what I've got. Black 8-Ball Black IPA, which is a rather cheeky 7%, so it's at the stronger end of these type of beers that I generally tend to drink, but let's give it a quick go.
Ooh.
That's quite an aggressive 7%, actually.
Is it?
But it's not too bad.
This is 3.6.
Yeah. What a girl. And it just tastes of sugar.
No, it's not too bad.
It's all right.
You picked it though, remember?
Well, yeah, I had to get you some fruit beer, didn't I? So we've done our own work. So The Adventure of the Dorset Street Lodger by Moorcock. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit of the introduction because I really like this introduction. It was one of those singularly hot Septembers when the whole of London seemed to wilt from overexposure to the sun, like some vast Arctic sea beast foundering upon a tropical beach and doomed to die of unnatural exposure. Where Rome or even Paris might have shimmered and blazed, London merely gasped. Our windows wide open to the noisy stillness of the air and our blinds drawn against the glaring light, we lay in a kind of torpor, Holmes stretched upon the sofa while I dozed in my easy chair and recalled my years in India when such heat had been normal and our accommodation rather better equipped to cope with it. I really love that introduction, and I get really sort of nice warm racket feelings. It reminds me of living with Earthy in the early 2000s in summer when we were between jobs and just kind of lazing around, him on a sofa or me on a sofa and the other in the armchair in our haze that we would be in those days, and the sunshine outside that we couldn't really cope with. And we would just laze around in that room, and we probably did that for, I don't know, on and off the thick end of 2 years. So this is one of the things I instantly like about this setup is you've got Holmes and Watson who, when they're not on a case, or when Watson's not attending to a patient, they're basically just lazing around on sofas and in armchairs, smoking pipes and staying out the sun, which is effectively what we did in those years, although without probably the more constructive purposes of solving crimes and looking after patients, even though I did on and off. But lots of pipe smoking and lazing about on sofas. Yeah, I really like that image. It's great.
But it's interesting, they were both supposed to be going away on holiday, but couldn't because of work.
Yeah.
And yet, as you say, they were both languishing about.
Yeah. So, that's the setup, isn't it? They're supposed to have been going on a holiday in the summer, going for some seaside air or whatever, but they can't because Watson has got...
Fishing.
Yeah, Watson's thinking about going fishing to the Dales or whatever it is. But they can't go because Watson's got a patient who's approaching delivery of a child, and Holmes, he's kind of ruminating over the assassination of Prince Ulrich, which Prince Ulrich, well, that's probably a little bit of Moorcock wordplay there, because a Prince Ulrich, Graf Ulrich von Beck, maybe, who knows in this world anyway. That's not really elaborated upon.
But why he couldn't do that on holiday, I find a bit...
Yeah, I'm sure he probably could have, but he wanted to remain close to London for whatever reason. And there's a really nice little bit in part of this setup where Holmes reads a note. Watson describes him, he finishes reading the note and he just drops it on the floor. He just loosely drops it on the floor. He doesn't put it on a table or anything like that. It's Holmes, he just reads it. The moment he's done with it, he just lets go and it just drops to the floor, which is great.
Probably expects Mrs. Hudson to clear it up later.
Yeah, absolute poor Mrs. Hudson. Poor Mrs. Hudson. We found out her cooking's not as good as someone else's shortly as well, which is great. So we learn that they have to turf out of 221B Baker Street for renovation works because Mrs. Hudson expected them to be on holiday.
So she set up some...
Yeah, she engaged Peach and Praise God.
But also some redecorating as well.
Yeah.
So, although I'm sure with his adventures and shooting holes into walls and all his experiments, it probably needs decorating.
Yeah, there's a nice little reference to that later on, isn't there, as well, which is quite amusing. Anyway, the pair have decided they can't leave London as they intended. So they need an alternative lodging. It's really amusing because Holmes goes through this like deductive process of what to do about where to move for 2 weeks. And then the result is they just ask Mrs. Hudson. But you get this big full paragraph of Holmes going through his deductive process. It's like, aha, we should ask Mrs. Hudson.
See if she knows anybody locally.
Yeah. So, of course, they do that. And she says Mrs. Ackroyd's place on 2 Dorset Street is ideal. And she recommends those lodgings, but she does tip them off that she's not overly impressed with Mrs. Ackroyd's Frenchified cooking, in inverted commas. But as it happens, they quite like it. They like the Frenchified cooking.
Yeah, because Frenchified means it's got some flavour.
Yeah, that's right. And I think they refer to... how do they refer to Mrs. Hudson's cooking?
Something plain.
Yeah.
It's got the word plain in it.
So when they're talking about Mrs. Ackroyd, it says, the good lady of solid Lancashire stock was clearly delighted at what she called the honour of looking after us, and we both agreed we had never experienced better attention. She had pleasant, broad features and a practical, no-nonsense manner to her which suited us both. While I would never have said so to either woman, her cooking was rather a pleasant change from Mrs. Hudson's good plain fare. So they're getting a break from, I don't know, shepherd's pie or whatever it is that she's feeding them.
Yeah, but I suppose if he's worked over when he went over to serve, he'll be used to spices. So he's come back to London to... Yeah,
of course. Veteran of Afghanistan, etc.
Yeah, so he's come back to probably boiled beef and sprouts or something.
Yeah, I mean, we found out during this period as well that this is post-Reichenbach Falls incident. Yes. And Holmes is actually quite lively, isn't he? Because basically they just spend a few days tossing it off going to the theatre. And Watson comments on how Holmes enjoys rather bass Cockney music hall.
Oh, the Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah, which Watson describes as like kind of Cockney music hall with an element of disgust.
Common, yeah.
That's an interesting thing as well, which I really enjoy about the portrayal of Watson in this, because of course Watson is the narrator in all these stories, isn't it? Everything's from Watson's point of view.
Yes.
And we'll get to that when we get to it. But we get some classic Holmes deduction as the business kind of picks up, and we realise that it's not just going to be 20 pages of Holmes and Watson going to watch Gilbert O'Sullivan or Gilbert and Sullivan. Gilbert O'Sullivan was the guy with the big hair on a piano in the 70s, wasn't he? So Gilbert and Sullivan, not Gilbert O'Sullivan.
I think I said Gilbert and Sullivan.
You did, but I said Gilbert O'Sullivan.
And going to the kinema.
That's right, the kinema. And actually it says here, this is the bit that mentions the kinema, it says, we were returning in the early evening to our temporary lodgings, having watched the kinema show at Madden Tussauds in Marylebone Road, when Holmes became suddenly alert, pointing his stick ahead of him and saying in that urgent murmur I knew so well, "What do you make of this fellow, Watson? The one with the brand new top hat, the red whiskers, and a borrowed morning coat, who recently arrived from the United States but has just returned from the northwestern suburbs, where he made an assignation he might now be regretting." I chuckled at this. "Come off it, Holmes," I declared. "I can see a chap in a topper, lugging a heavy bag, but how could you say it was from the United States and so on? I have no idea. I believe you're making it up, old man." "Certainly not, my dear Watson. Surely you've noticed that the morning coat is actually beginning to part in the back seam, and is therefore too small for the wearer. The most likely explanation is that he borrowed a coat for the purpose of making a particular visit. The hat is obviously purchased recently, for the same reason, while the man's boots have the gaucho heel characteristic of the southwestern United States. A style found only in that region, and adapted, of course, from a Spanish riding boot. I have made a study of human heels, Watson, as well as human soles." This is you could totally imagine this dialogue and this presentation of Holmes in any TV show or any media adaptation.
Absolutely.
I'm not any kind of expert on Arthur Conan Doyle, or I have not read any Sherlock Holmes whatsoever. So all of my knowledge of Sherlock Holmes is purely based on media other than books. But this just feels like super, super authentic, with a little hint of playfulness, like the thing about him having made a study of Spanish heels.
And I think that was the thing, wasn't it? That he did go into huge descriptions about different things and learnt things like heels and cigarette brands and the type of ash they left as residue. And There was a lot of it.
This is the Holmes trope,
Yes.
isn't it? This
Yes.
is, he stands there and he just spouts off all of this deduction, which I think is still a really, really common trope in modern detective serials. It's just now you get stuff like Criminal Minds, where they split the dialogue amongst 8 different people and they all say a line each and go around the room, which obviously we've talked about before. It continues. We kept an even distance behind the subject of our discussion. The traffic along Baker Street was at its heaviest, full of noisy carriages, snorting horses, yelling drivers, and all of London's varied humanity pressing its way homeward, desperate to find some means of cooling its collective body. Our quarry had periodically to stop and put down his bag, occasionally changing hands, before continuing. "But why do you say he arrived recently, and has been visiting north-west London?" I asked. "That, Watson, is elementary. If you think for a moment, it will all come clear to you that our friend is wealthy enough to afford the best in hats and Gladstone bags, yet wears a morning coat too small for him. It suggests he came with little luggage, or perhaps his luggage was stolen and he had no time to visit a tailor, or he went to one of the ready-made places and took the nearest fit. Thus the new bag also, which he no doubt bought to carry the object he has just acquired. That he did not realise how heavy it was is clear, and I'm sure if he were not staying nearby he would have hired a cab for himself. He could well be regretting his acquisition. Perhaps it was something very costly, but not exactly what he was expecting to get. He certainly did not realise how awkward it would be to carry, especially in this weather. That suggests to me that he believed he could walk from Baker Street Underground Railway Station, which in turn suggests he's been visiting north-west London, which is chiefly served from Baker Street. He's a real smart-ass, Holmes, isn't he?
But I think that Watson just sees it as that is how he is.
Yeah.
It's how his brain works, how he talks to people. His interactions have always been a bit hard.
Yeah.
But Watson has taken him warts and all, hasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it turns out this fella, as they follow him, is also dodging at 2 Dorset Street. What a coincidence. And they also found out when they introduced themselves to him and tried to talk to him on the stairs, he's rather brusque and annoyed at their intervention. As he goes up the stairs, they spot something in his bag, a glint of silver, a glint of gold, a small hand. And he's not happy to be interrupted, and he says, "Be warned, gentlemen, I possess a revolver and I know how to use it." Holmes accepted this news gravely and informed the man that while he understood an exchange of pistol fire to be something of the nature of an introductory courtesy in Texas, in England it was still considered unnecessary to support one's cause by letting off guns in the house. This I found a little like hypocrisy from one given to target practice in the parlour.
Yes. But that is when Holmes does mention Dr. Watson, and that grabs James's attention.
That's right. Once he realises who they are, his demeanour changes, and he realises that it is in fact Holmes and Watson, and tells them that he's actually been to Baker Street to look for them. So his demeanour entirely changes, and they agree to have a drink in an hour because he's been seeking their services. And we found out a little bit about the case. So what is the case? He's James Macclesworth from Galveston, Texas, and is in the UK. He's in England because
his cousin he'd been corresponding with his cousin for several years, and he had written to him to say that if in the case of his death, if he would follow through with some specific requests with regards to an object that had been previously stolen.
Mm-hmm.
So, being an honourable man, James decides to follow through with what his cousin, who was Sir Geoffrey Macclesworth, of the English aristocracy, who lived in Oxfordshire. Mm. So that's how he ended up coming over, and the item he was to pick up was an item that Mrs. Galabaster, the housekeeper, was holding on to, and he'd had to prove his identity, and she had then given it to him. How she had it when it had been reported stolen several years ago remains quite a mystery, but obviously James feels quite awkward by all of this which is going on, which is why he decided to call on Sherlock and Dr. Watson.
And because Sherlock and Dr. Watson, actually Dr. Watson as well as Holmes, are quite smarty pants, they've already identified it as the Fellini Perseus. A solid silver and gold statuette, which is of terrific value. Yeah, so this is the setup. Is we've got the death of Sir Geoffrey, and on his death, his cousin James has been contacted, or was in fact contacted ahead of his death to say if anything dodgy goes on, and if you die, get yourself to England, find Mrs. Galibaster, and pick up this thing and take it back to America post haste.
But to give a bit more history, of Sir Geoffrey was one who, he was born into a lot of wealth. His father had created this great wealth, but when Geoffrey came along, he kind of squandered it. He was quite easy prey for a lot of people. He gave money to a lot of artists. He loves art, and I think that's where a lot of his money went. And I think there was a lot of creditors at his death.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of history of the family.
Yeah.
And it sounds like James only found out that he was related to this when Sir Geoffrey started writing to him several years ago.
So Mr. Macclesworth, James Macclesworth, has been to see Mrs. Galibaster and obtained the item, and he describes the encounter. He says, "Well, it was a dingy house, rather of a kind I'm completely unfamiliar with, all crowded along a little road about a quarter of a mile from the station. Not at all what I'd expected. Number 18 was dingier than the rest, a poor sort of place altogether, with peeling paint, an overgrown yard, bulging garbage cans, and all the kind of things you expect to see in East Side New York, not in a suburb of London. All this notwithstanding, I found the dirty knocker and hammered upon the door until it was opened by a surprisingly attractive woman, of what I should describe as the octoroon persuasion. A large woman, too, with long but surprisingly well-manicured hands. Indeed, she was impeccable in her appearance, in distinct contrast to her surroundings. She was expecting me. Her name was Mrs. Galibaster. I knew the name at once. Sir Geoffrey had often spoken of her in terms of considerable affection and trust. She had been, she told me, Sir Geoffrey's housekeeper. He had enjoined her, before he died, to perform this last loyal deed for him. He handed me a note he had written to that effect, and he passes this note to Holmes. So we had to look up octoroon, didn't we?
Yeah.
An octoroon is an old, out of use and probably what would be deemed an offensive term these days for at least 1/8 black, or approximately 1/8 black or of African descent. And it actually comes up a little bit later because Watson has already made a judgment and jumped to a conclusion about Macclesworth and perhaps what might be behind it all. And it's probably a good time to talk about Watson, because in media, especially in the Basil Rathbone stuff, which I think I'll kind of spun out from there, Watson is always, whilst he's easy to get quite kind of flustered about things,
yes,
he's generally quite a kindly, almost grandfatherly presence, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In later versions, perhaps he's a little bit more staid, but always a very stable character, and not one to jump to conclusions or kind of really impart any great opinion on anything other than just to try and catch Holmes out by deducing something before Holmes does. I'm assuming this is Moorcock building upon something that you actually get in the actual books, and of course the books and the stories are from the 1880s, 1890s, or whatever they're from.
But it was like if Holmes would ask Watson to do something, he would very much go with his own views, and he would believe that he was on the right track. And sometimes Holmes would very kindly kind of say, actually, you're totally wrong.
Yeah.
So.
But we've got an interesting passage here which, as the narrator actually citing his own language in a conversation with Holmes, as perhaps slightly less patronly and fatherly or more judgmental. Because Holmes says, "What do you make of it, Watson?" Holmes asked as he reached for his long-stemmed clay pipe and filled it with tobacco from the slipper he'd brought with him. "Do you think our Mr. Macclesworth is the real article, as his compatriots would say?" "I was very favourably impressed, Holmes, but I do believe he has been duped into involving himself in an adventure which, if he obeyed his own honest instincts, he would never have considered. I do not believe that Sir Geoffrey was everything he claimed to be. Perhaps he was when you knew him, Holmes, but since then he is clearly degenerated. He keeps an octoroon mistress, gets heavily into debt, and then plans to steal his own treasures in order to preserve it from creditors."
And he's making the assumption that it's a mistress.
Yeah, he's instantly jumping to a conclusion or trying to deduce ahead of Holmes what the issue is, but in doing so, he's saying that the guy is something of a degenerate because he kept an octoroon mistress and maybe faked his own death to try and escape creditors.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty direct and judgmental thing, which you don't tend to get from Watson in other media. But I'm really interested now in reading the original Arthur Conan Doyle stories, just to kind of explore this a little bit more.
Just because their thought processes are so very different.
Yeah, and Holmes kind of disavows him of that notion pretty quickly, doesn't he?
Yes.
He says, "There's only one flaw there, Watson. Sir Geoffrey appears to have anticipated his own suicide and left instructions with her. Mr. Macclesworth identified the handwriting. I read the note myself. Mr. Macclesworth has corresponded with Sir Geoffrey for years, and he confirmed that the note was clearly Sir Geoffrey's. So this appears to clear the housekeeper of any wrongdoing. So anyway, they decide to jump on a train and head off to Sir Geoffrey's place to investigate. And here we get just another great example of how Moorcock is king of concise, descriptive narrative. And it's all on here. You get this description of this train journey, and obviously it's kind of tinged with Watson's love of the English countryside and everything else. But it's still really, really vivid and really descriptive. And, you know, whether Moorcock's describing a sea battle or the Camargue or any of these different things, in this is just describing a train journey through Oxfordshire. And it's still just super vivid.
It's like what we found last year with Robert E. Howard.
Yeah.
You've got such a short story confined into such a small number of pages.
Yeah.
But what he writes is just so colourful and in depth, and it draws you in. You feel like you're reading something that's a lot longer.
Yeah. And there's a description of the lady who runs the post office, the proprietress of the post office.
Mrs. Beck.
It's a handful of words. It says, Mrs. Beck was a plump pink woman in plain prints and a starched pinafore with humorous eyes and a slight pursing of the mouth which suggested a conflict between a natural warmth and a slightly censorious temperament. One sentence, and that woman is alive. That character is alive. It's absolutely fantastic.
Gives you an idea of what she'd be like if you went into that shop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And met her.
It's you know, he probably did write this on the bog. He's just got that absolute talent where one sentence and he's conjured up a really vivid and rich character almost effortlessly.
I don't think he did it on the bog, though.
Well,
I think he put a lot of effort in to follow Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You want it to...
Possibly, yeah, possibly. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh.
But you have read a lot more than I have, so you have a right to your opinion on that.
So we get some more details regarding the housekeeper, and they return to London and have tea with Macclesworth. And not only is this story wry and entertaining, and it's evocative. It's really evocative. It's also educational, because they go back and have tea with Mr. Macclesworth. And he says, our ritual was overseen by the splendid Fellini silver which, perhaps to catch the best of the light, Holmes had placed in our sitting room window looking out onto the street. It was as if we ate our tea in the presence of an angel. Mr. Macclesworth balanced his plate on his knee, wearing an expression of delight. I have heard of this ceremony, gentlemen, but never expected to be taking part in a high tea with Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Indeed, you were doing no such thing, sir, Holmes said gently. It is a common misconception, I gather, among our American cousins, that high and afternoon tea are the same thing. They are very different meals, taken at quite different times. High tea was, in my day, only eaten at certain seats of learning, and was a hot early supper. The same kind of supper, served in a nursery, has of late been known as high tea. Afternoon tea, which consists of a conventional cold sandwich selection, sometimes with scones, clotted cream and strawberry jam, is eaten by adults, generally at 4 o'clock. High tea, by and large, is eaten by children at 6 o'clock. The sausage was always very evident at such meals when I was young. Holmes appeared to shudder subtly. I read that, I was thinking, oh, I didn't know that.
No, I didn't. It was informative, but it was also like, all right,
yeah,
thank
all
you.
Right, you fucking tea nerd.
I'm an American.
Yeah, but also while I was reading it, it did make me want afternoon tea. But it also made me realise that time we had afternoon tea at that really nice hotel in Scarborough, we probably had it 2 hours early, so that was poor form.
We did.
I think we had it about 2 o'clock.
I think we did.
I've got to say, though, if you have afternoon tea at 4 o'clock, what time do you have your proper tea? Because, of course, now we're veering into that terrible, minefield of is it tea or is it dinner? We're Northerners. So tea, dinner, is tea to us, isn't it?
Yeah.
So to anybody here who's listening, perhaps in America, there are all sorts of strange north-south or even not even north-south divides in the UK about certain things like scones versus scones. It's scones, by the way. But in the north, where we're from, I'm from Old Phil's from Grimsby, your evening meal at 5:30 or 6 o'clock or whatever is your tea.
It is.
Your dinner is
Is
what
it
other people would know
lunchtime?
as your lunch. Is it dinner time? Means is it about 12:30?
But a lot of other people have their dinner at night.
Yeah. Yeah, so, people who think they're posh say, we're going for dinner, whereas we say, we're off out for tea.
Hence, we are right.
Yeah, why don't you come round for tea? You mean dinner? Fuck off, you're not coming. That's how we roll in the north.
And it's a scone,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. So anyway, after the education about tea, basically, Holmes solves it, doesn't he? Holmes just sits back and says, it's like this. And without wanting to kind of give it all away, we will. No, we won't. Shall we not give it away? Because it's a spoiler, isn't it? Even though we spoil all Moorcock books when we talk about them.
But he's been back to get some evidence from Baker Street before he came back.
Yeah, because he knew Sir
Something-
Geoffrey from a club, didn't
Yes.
he? And he's actually got some kind of correspondence from Geoffrey kicking around in a drawer somewhere. So he's gone back. He's figured out actually the handwriting thing. There's certainly something quite incorrect going on there.
Yeah.
But to cut a long story short without spoiling it, the Fellini Perseus being in the window is basically Holmes has laid a trap for the culprit, who does indeed turn up, climb up the trellis, get in the house, manages to stab Holmes with a Bowie knife, and then they chase him out the window and he falls to the pavement where he is carried off to hospital. And everything is over and Holmes gets to very, very smugly outline what went down, and it all makes perfect sense.
We don't know if he died or not because Watson shot him
Yeah.
and he fell out the window.
Yeah.
But there was no mention of...
All there is he was taken to hospital, isn't there? So unfortunately, poor James Mackleworth from Galveston, Texas, finds out that he's not really related to Sir Geoffrey at all, but the culprit behind it all basically exploited him to try and get the Fellini silver taken across to the States where he could pick it up later on.
And in fact, he never corresponded with Sir Geoffrey.
No.
It was all with the arch evil person.
Yeah. So poor Mackleworth has to go back to Galveston, Texas, empty-handed, and is not related to a rich English aristocrat. The end.
The end.
I kind of dug it.
Are we saying who it is, or are we leaving that?
Oh, I think we spoil all Moorcock, don't we, by talking
we
about
leave
an
it?
160-page book for 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
So maybe at some point people may well read this short story. And actually, we have read this short story. I mentioned earlier on where it was first published. It was published in the Nightshade Press edition. But we read this in a book called Sherlock, Over 80 Stories Starring the Greatest Detective of All Time, selected by Otto Penzler. And it's a ginormous hardback book
Certainly is.
of knocking on, I don't know, almost 900 pages with 80 short stories in it. Turns out, I think we've got 3 copies of this now, because when I reordered another copy, it turned out I'd ordered one before, and then I realised that we couldn't find the other one and we needed a copy each, so I added another one. So we've now got 3 copies of this enormous breeze block of a book in the house. And it's actually, I quite enjoyed reading that, so I might actually have a route through and read some more.
Also, being a huge Holmes fan,
Yeah.
that I absolutely love this, and I think that Michael did it absolute credit.
Yeah.
It was fabulous. I would recommend anybody to give it a read.
Yeah.
If whether they have or they haven't read any Holmes before.
And I would recommend picking up this book as well. It's split into several sections. So there are short stories that have been around a long time and that have been reprinted many times. There are stories by all sorts of very well-known writers. Neil Gaiman, Anthony Burgess, A.A. Milne, P.G. Wodehouse. I'll definitely be reading the P.G. Wodehouse one. Kingsley Amis, August Derleth, weirdly enough. Wow. James Barrie. Who else we got? Stephen King, Poul Anderson. Yeah, now I'm actually looking at the list of the authors involved. I'll be reading a lot more of these.
Some very renowned authors there.
Colin Dexter.
No way.
He's one of yours, isn't he?
He's not, but yeah.
Who did Colin Dexter write?
Morse,
all right, yeah. Tanith Lee, another well-known, well-respected fantasy author. Manly Word Wellman. So yeah, well worth picking up. Well,
if we find the third one, we'll have to give it away.
If I can maybe think of a decent question or something for Twitter, maybe we could... we've never done a competition before, have we?
No.
Maybe we could post it to somebody. I'll think of something and we'll post one of these copies to someone or other. So, anyway, it's your birthday. We're having a lovely day. We've had a few nice drinks. At some point we've got to think about what we're going to do for tea. I almost said dinner. Yeah. We can't go out and stay in a hotel and have a 3-course dinner. So we're going to have to think of something, aren't we?
But I'm glad we've done this again. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Especially with it being Sherlock themed.
Yeah. And of course, in the new year, as the Twitterati voted, we'll be doing The Warhound and the World's Pain, won't we?
We will. Absolutely.
So we'll be delving a little bit into Von Beck. But for now, thanks very much for giving time on your birthday for us to do this. I think we always enjoy it, don't we?
We do. And thank you, Michael, for writing this, and once again, happy birthday.
Yep, happy birthday, Mike. And now for a few more birthday messages, kicking off with Robert McMillan.
Phil, happy birthday from Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. I'm an ardent admirer of your and Andy's work on this podcast, and I appreciate the mix of views that you bring to Michael Moorcock's writing, themes, plots, and style. When we're safe to venture out, I'll be happy to make the trip overseas, and I can confidently say drinks on me. Take care, be safe, and thanks for everything that you do. And happy birthday, Michael. I came to your books just shy of 14. I was an American boy on his first trip abroad and on his own. I found some of your novels in my cousin's library in Germany, a welcome and warm current of English in a sea of German, a language I had yet to learn fluently. I took Oswald Bastable and Coram with me from Stuttgart to Hamburg to Berlin and back, imagining myself on their journeys even as I took your pages into my mind on second-class train seats on the Deutsche Bahn. Those days and your words never left me. They take me backward and forward in time, and I'm grateful for the ride.
Hi Michael, Hussein here from Andy's Breakfast in the Ruins podcast. Just wanted to wish you a very happy 81st birthday. Now I know traditionally the person whose birthday it is supposed to have a birthday wish, but in case you're struggling, I do have my own wish to recommend. I wish to know whether your prophecies in the final programme were as a result of A. a coincidence, B. a mighty crystal ball that you might possess, or C. a butterfly effect sort of deal, where you might have whispered into people's ears over the years as a means to influence the future. I'm going with C. I think that's how David Icke came to be convinced by shape-shifting lizards controlling the world. But it would be great if you could confirm in one way or the other before your 82nd birthday. Happy birthday once more.
Hi, Nathan here from Coram, an upstarting rock project inspired by the works of Michael Moorcock. I just wanted to wish the Lord of Chaos himself a very happy birthday. Thank you endlessly for the years of inspiration that has profoundly impacted the literary genre as a whole, and of course, the music. Now I'm going to perform for you live a very, very short piece inspired by the Albino Emperor and a certain black sword. Happy birthday, Michael Moorcock, and blood and souls for Arioch.
Happy birthday, Breakfast in the Ruins, with a steely handshake and a grim smile over the fields of the fallen from Lord Samper of Lord Samper's Library. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep traversing those moonbeam roads. You're the only man who can. Birthday wishes, take 2. Let's forget about take 1. That never happened. Anyway, happy birthday, Mike and Phil. I hope you both have the best day and are thoroughly spoilt rotten. Mike, thank you so much for all the great books that I've read of yours over the last, forever. But thank you most of all for breaking it to me that the best thing a hero can do is just kick the bucket and let the world get on with it. And Phil, your lessons on heroism have yet to become clear, but thank you for sending me that copy of Wizardry and Wild Romance. I remain forever in your debt, Lord Samper.
Okay, we're back, and we're back in virtual Derry and Tom's, and I've got a very special guest with me at the moment, Jason, aka the Pastor, who, when I first kicked this podcast off, a little bit over a year ago now, he was one of our chief encouragements on Twitter. We bumped into each other, as one does, in the Twitter sphere, and exchanged some conversations and ideas, and he was very much popped up as a hardcore Moorcock geek, and there's a lot of us about. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. What a joy! I love that this exists today, and good to meet you. Good to put a face to the name and a voice. What a fun time we live in. 2020 is not all bad.
No, I was only saying to my partner the other day, we were having a conversation about this, and had this pandemic occurred 20 years ago when the internet couldn't cope with things like HD video and audio conferencing and all those other bits and pieces, I think it would have been a tougher time somehow, although probably it would have given me more time to read books, so it wouldn't have been the end of the world.
I agree. I started off this year, starting in March, my reading level went up. Lately It's been a little busy, but yeah, it's technology keeps us more connected. It's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You were very kind enough to record a birthday message for Mr. Moorcock himself last year when we did our birthday episode, because of course we found that Phil's birthday coincides with Michael Moorcock's birthday, which is one of those strange pieces of synchronicity that occurred when we started doing this. And I think what's immediately apparent from interacting with you on Twitter is in many, many ways we are diametric opposites.
I suspect that we are. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well phrased. Phrased.
And, obviously we won't go into any detailed rows about politics or anything like that, but no, I think from my perspective, I probably consider myself, by UK standards, I suppose I'm left of centre, verging on socialist in some ways, and I'm an atheist.
Okay.
However, from your perspective,
I'm a conservative Christian pastor in the United States. I definitely lean conservative. I don't consider myself alt-right or hard-right. Just as something if I can just make a passing statement about current political situations, you win some, you lose some. Conservatives win, that conservatives lose. I think we're better for the balance. I'm not one of these hard people that believes that we must always win or burn the country down. Yeah, I lean conservative. That doesn't mean that I think the opposite side of the aisle is the bad guys. And I hope we can challenge each other. But yes, I am conservative libertarian. That tends to go in the U.S. pretty strongly together. And I'm definitely a very, very devout Christian, I would say.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that sense, we are different. Isn't Michael Moorcock's writings amazing? That he can take two people like you and me that may not have a whole lot in common in other ways. But if we were sitting across the table with a cup of coffee, I know that we could go for hours and not notice those other differences, because he's got such a wide volume of work, and there's so much there that we can read into and agree about. Because it's not just entertainment. Some of the books are certainly entertaining, but they're so thought-provoking. And conversations about what he's doing in The Eternal Champion or Between the Wars seems very poignant right now. The fourth book, Jerusalem Commands, and the rise of Mussolini. Man, I think both sides of the aisle have room to talk about what is Mike communicating. I love that he can bring people together for those conversations.
Yeah, and that's the wonderful thing about this experience for me is I started doing this because I wanted a hobby, but one of the things which I didn't necessarily expect was to be connected with such a wide variety and array of people from all over the world who share the same passion and have the same enjoyment and share the same admiration for Michael Moorcock. So this was a perfect opportunity. And this is why I thought it would be a really good idea just for us to get together and just ruminate on the appeal of Michael Moorcock. But let's just think about you for a second. I've talked for 16 or 17 episodes about all this stuff now. So
and they're wonderful.
How did you connect? Well, thank you. But how did you connect with, first of all, fantasy? And then Moorcock specifically.
So fantasy was easy for me but it might have been hard for my mom. My mother is quite the science fiction fan. She has the original TV guy that said, hey, there's this new TV show coming out called Star Trek, and she's got that. So I remember when I was kindergarten, first grade, passing through the living room, and my mom was flipping through the channels and said, oh, it's Doctor Who. Jason, sit down. You'll love it. I think maybe Empire Strikes Back was the first movie I saw in the theater. I would have been 5 or 6. So my mom is a huge science fiction fan, Lord of the Rings, and raised me on that. Narnia was how I learned to read. I did learn to read before I went to school. My mom started reading to me The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and by the time that we got to the last battle, I was reading them to her. So on the one hand, my mom is quite the science fiction fan. My dad is a retired now, very conservative, a little more old school Christian conservative preacher, and his dad was a traveling evangelist, fire and brimstone revivalist. So Grandpa was very very old school. My father is pretty traditional in a lot of ways. I just as an aside, I didn't intend on going into ministry. I'm a certified registered locksmith. I dodged the pulpit for as long as I could, but it's kind of in the blood. And by the time I hit around the age of 30, my dad came to me one day and said, you're wasting your time doing other things when clearly this is where you're called. And I fought it a bit and disagreed a bit, but here we are. So my mom raised me on a very healthy dose of science fiction. In fact, if anything, I got in trouble that I was reading science fiction so much my grades were suffering. In 7th grade, my parents threatened to put me back in 6th grade if I didn't quit reading a sci-fi novel per day. Yeah. And I'm one of the few people I know that got punished for reading too much. In 7th grade, the local library was fantastic. I would ride my bike down to the local library, East Northport, New York. And they had everything. They had Thieves World, and they had Anne McCaffrey, and they had this kind of little turntable style with paperback novels. And I read through the whole thing. They had Thieves World and Anne McCaffrey, as I said, and I don't even remember everything that was in there. They had the first 5 Elric books with those beautiful Robert Gold covers that I just love. I still love them. They didn't have book 6, which was really disappointing. So I read Elric of Melniboné all the way through Bane of the Black Sword. Had no idea they were not in writing order. I thought that he wrote them in that order. Got to Bane of the Black Sword. I was a broke junior high kid. It was going to be years before I read Stormbringer, and kind of held on and remember fondly high school, hitting every used bookstore and garage sale pre-internet, trying to find these lost novels. I just read them when I found them. So the Hawkmoon books I read in no semblance of an order. I read Count Brass first, and eventually, when eBay kind of became a thing, it kind of became the chance to fill in the collection, look for stuff. And then when the multiverse.org as a website went up, finding wonderful people on there. In particular, shout out to my friend David, who has been just amazing to me, who would point me towards books and say, yeah, you're missing this one in your collection, or no, that's the same book with a different name. That community just strengthened my ability to collect. And I've got a good wife who recognizes this is my passion. So recently I finally bit the bullet and bought Into the Media Web, and it from Jade Designs.
Oh, you managed to get a copy.
I did. I had asked you if you had Jade Designs. For those that are Michael Moorcock fans, Jade Designs is amazing. John Davey runs that, and I
can second that.
He has everything. I have the problem I found with Jade Designs is now that I think I have pretty much all of Mike's books, now I want more. I want new editions. I think fanatics get that. So now I'm looking through his website saying, now I need the audio from Sailor on the Seas of Fate, and I need these comics, and I'm excited about that. It's a great site. But yes, I confessed to my wife I just bought the most expensive book I've ever bought. Here's, and I told her the price. Here's how much I paid, and she said, "Well, but you didn't have it. You needed it." So I've been very fortunate that my parents as a kid knew I was fanatical about him as a writer. My wife gets that it's beyond a passion. If I had one writer on my bookshelf, after my Bible, it's Michael Moorcock, and I want them all, and I want everything that he's written. And I am that fanatical about it, and because he touches something in me, and I think that's why people like you and I can relate in his books. Is he passionately taps into that common core of humanity, like the novel The Eternal Champion. I think The Eternal Champion, for example, asks that question: what does it mean to be human? Eric Azay's crime is that he betrays humanity. Atheist or Christian, I hope that we're asking that same question. What does it mean to actually be human? Whether or not we think we're made in the image of God, we agree that it's good to be human, to fight against our base instincts and be better than we are. And I think Christians and atheists have no trouble discussing this, or any religion. Let me at Michael Moorcock, all faiths and no faith meets in what it means to be a human being. And I love him for that. Interacting with him on the multiverse, which was always amazing, that he would interact with his fans. And I had great discussions with him about books like Behold the Man. And I was always humbled that he would say, "Hey, Jason, how did your Easter service go?" And I loved that he cared. He is such a good human being who sought to unite us and not divide us. And if there was ever a message for 2020, certainly in the U.S., but I think worldwide, increasingly we're becoming divisive. And that's what I've loved about Mike, is he does unite us. So, sorry, I'm a preacher. Give me a soapbox. I will talk for hours, and I'm not letting you get a word in edgewise.
Well, in this kind of format, that's pure gold. So don't worry about that for a second.
Oh, well, good then.
But I entirely agree. Michael Moorcock is first and foremost a humanist, isn't he?
Yes, absolutely. And not in a bad way. Sometimes the conservative right might use that as an insult, but I will not. Certainly in the case of Mike. Mike is a humanist in every good sense of the word, and it's one of the things I love the most about his books.
I've found throughout my rereading that I'm interpreting the characters in a slightly different way, reading them as a 48. I had to think there for a second.
About the same age. I'm 46.
Yeah. And of course, reading them as a teenager, they did have quite a profound effect on me. And I did them in entirely the wrong order, of course, because the first Elric book I was given was the late 60s Ace pocketbook edition of Stormbringer. So I read the last Elric book first of all, but it was still pretty mind-blowing because I'd read a little bit of Conan, I think I'd read King Kull, I'd read some other bits and bobs of fantasy, but there's something very, very different and very, very distinctive about Moorcock, and particularly when... Now I know Moorcock himself drew certain influences from people like Robert E. Howard as a voracious reader himself, and Edgar Rice Burroughs particularly. But there's something very, very different about Moorcock's protagonists in that they're not the rippling beefcake ubermen of traditional fantasy. It's not Thongor, let's get a bit more obscure. It's not Thongor, it's not Brak the Barbarian, it's not Conan, it's not any of these other kind of... Well, I'll tell you what, if you want to go off down a particularly dark alley, it's not Daenus of Reglathium either. There's a story behind that. We'll be covering that on a podcast soon.
I'll hear that later then.
Yeah. It's very, very unique, and there's certainly elements of, who wrote Gormenghast? My brain's emptied.
Mervyn Peake.
So there's that Mervyn Peake type imagery involved, which is very, very different. But what is it about Moorcock's protagonist? So you kicked off with Elric. What is it about Elric that is so relatable?
Elric is... I love Elric to bits. On a 1 to 10, he's a 12 or a 15 or a 20. How high can I cheat? I think my dislike of Elric is, I'll start with that off, is that he's the one that's the most quoted, and he's the popular one. And I don't like him for the popularity, and I don't like him for a lot of the reasons that a lot of other people like. He's not cool to me. It's just the opposite. When I have suffered from depression my whole life. When I encountered Elric in 7th grade, for the first time in my life, I felt that there was a character that I could relate to, and that the author knew what I was going through. I wasn't the smartest 7th grader by any means, but I could see what he was doing. I could see the tales that he was telling. While the Gods Laugh was a breathtaking story that resonated with me in ways that I couldn't imagine and kept me going. That quest for meaning in life, and what happens when everything that you feel is important to you crumbles around you. And as a Christian, this is important because there are days when life goes well, and there are days as a Christian that I say, God, if you love me, why is everything falling apart around me? Why are my parents hanging on by a thread to whether their marriage will work? Why are we struggling maybe with poverty, or why am I getting picked on in school? And I got picked on in school a lot growing up. And so Elric was that safe place in my head. I would retreat. When people say fantasy is a retreat, it was for me. Elric was the best of retreats. He became... I don't know, what's the junior high version of an imaginary friend? I would walk to school and I would talk with him. No, I knew he was fictional, but I knew Mike wasn't. And I knew that Mike was communicating some truths that I couldn't put into words that worked for me. So I like Elric, but I'm not sure that I like him for the way that everybody does. Elric is my spirit animal, if you want to use that phrase. He gets me. No character in fantasy has ever got my feelings of despair and struggle. And as I've gotten older, I've learned coping techniques with depression and seen counseling, and I have an amazing wife, Pamela, who helps me through that, and I'm grateful for that. But without question, Mike was a coping technique to deal with the depression that I was struggling with. And that's what art should do. And I think music does that typically.
Yeah.
poetry does that, but a lot of times fiction isn't seen to do that. And I like that when people talk, you mentioned that you started with Stormbringer. I like when people have described Stormbringer as a heavy metal novel. I kind of get it, because there is a musical tone to so many of Mike's books. They resonate almost not like writing, but like music. I love Elric, and then I love the Oswald Bastable books, The Nomad of Time. Other favorites because of that struggle of everything's falling apart around me. I may not even be able to stop that, but what kind of a person will I be as it's happening? And man, that is a message for everybody. Wherever you fall on left or right, faith issues, everybody has to ask those questions. And that's why it's humanism. It's the core of what it means to be human. Man, regardless of religion or politics, we're all dealing with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Elric was my first. I think he's the most relatable. I think for me, Bastable is my second most relatable, and it's a toss-up which one I love more. But all of his books are related, and they're the same character, so I don't have to pick a favorite.
That's right.
I love that he did that. We're just talking about the Eternal Champion, and what a brilliant concept. What I think is so funny is that so many people that play Warhammer and Dungeons and Dragons and so many other things do not realize how pivotal, how prolific Michael Moorcock's works were to everything that they understand about gaming and fantasy, law and chaos, the multiverse, microprocessors in the Sundered World, cyberpunk with Jerry Cornelius, all these concepts that he was, steampunk. Is Bastable the first alternate universe timeline novel? Is Warlord of the Air? I mean, Frankenstein is steampunk, but alternate reality with zeppelins and rivets. And isn't that? I mean, at so many levels, Mike's books are pivotal to where everybody in fantasy and science fiction is, regardless of genre. And yet, I'm always amazed in the U.S. how few people know his works. And I find that so very sad. And he's still alive. It's not like we're talking about someone from Lord Dunsany or somebody from ages ago. He's still writing. And yet I find myself always giving away books to people who've never heard of him. And I do. I love finding a book just to purchase it on the cheap so I can give it to a friend. I'm evangelistic about Mike's books.
It's very interesting as well that in the UK, and of course he's a British author, what I'm finding is increasingly difficult to take when you're a hardcore fan of something, is just how unknown he is more broadly. And considering that Gollancz have his entire Eternal Champion range available, and they published them several years ago, the major book chains in the UK, Waterstones is one of them. If you go in Waterstones, you will not see a Michael Moorcock book on the shelf. You'll see William Gibson. You'll see Neuromancer still in print. You'll see Tolkien coming out with your ear rolls. But yeah, for whatever reason, you just do not see Michael Moorcock in mainstream British booksellers. And the real shame of it is that we've got to that point now where, unlike 20, 25 years ago, when I was still seeking out the editions, I think by the time I was 25, I had most of his books, but I was always chasing down that other Mayflower edition or whatever else. Absolutely. In those days, he was ubiquitous in second-hand bookshops and charity stores, or Goodwill, as you would call them in the States. It was everywhere. And it's from time to time now, I'll go in a second-hand bookshop, or a friend will send me a picture of a second-hand bookshop in some obscure northern British place like Morecambe, and there'll be a big pile of Grafton and Mayflower 70s editions, and it's wonderful. It's like going back in time. But we're in that sad situation now where charity shops are all overrun with Dan Brown and 50 Shades of Grey novels in triplicate and very little else. And
Preach.
Yeah.
It's the same here. It's the same.
What? Yeah, that's a terrible thought.
No different.
But that's nationwide. That's international.
It is international.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. And, I work in the line of work where we have, and this is a terrible modern expression and an example of where we are in the world, but we have team huddles in inverted commas.
Oh, yeah.
And our team it consists of about 40 people. And, occasionally on these huddles there'll be some conversation, something to lighten the mood, what's made you smile this week or something like that. And the podcasts come up a couple of times, and 40 people, not one of them has heard of Michael Moorcock. Not one. 40 English people, ranging in age from mid-20s to 50-odd, not one of them has heard of Michael Moorcock, but they've all heard of The Witcher.
Well, yes. Don't get me started on that. We were going to get an Elric show.
Yeah.
And then my understanding is The Witcher came out, and then people said, "Oh, it's too much like The Witcher," and killed our Elric show. I would give anything for that.
Yeah, I think there's still some effort being made by the BBC and an independent production company to do the History of the Rune stuff.
And I think that would be a great opening. The Elric story is dark, and it is adult in ways. There's some bad things. Spoilers: Count Smeorgan dies pretty tragically. And that death hit me hard because I liked the character. Yeah. The Elric story is dark. It might be a hard sell. Hawkmoon is very noble, I feel, and now the first 4 books. The second 3 get really surreal. Ilion of Garethorm and Quest for Tane Lorn are pretty crazy reads at times, and I love them. Don't get me wrong, but I think Hawkmoon and Corum would be easier to start off with. Maybe Hawkmoon first, and then maybe Corum. Before I would do Elric, if it was me trying to tell these stories, I would see how Hawkmoon went over. If it went over well, try Corum, and then and then when you've prepped people for, this is great fiction. Well, here's Elric, and here's Sailor on the Seas of Fate, and we're going to bring these characters back, and by the way, they're the same.
Yeah.
I think that could be a lot. And that's where with the 5 Doctors and the 3 Doctors and Time Crash and other episodes, I think that people would enjoy that.
There is now precedence for this in film and television, isn't there?
Yes. There is.
What would be really so wonderful is if you got somebody who could do the Michael Moorcock televisual or cinematic universe where you build up
that's what I would
the
do.
Tower of Valoidian Gosnazdiak or whatever it's called.
Yes.
Did I get that right? I hope
Vanishing Tower.
Yeah, the Vanishing Tower. Yeah,
or whatever we call
it would be absolutely wonderful, and it's interesting that you mention Stormbringer being described as a heavy metal novel.
Right. I read that
that's
recently.
Absolutely true. Yeah, it's been a while since I read it, but when I first read that, when I was given it by Pops, I was probably 11, 12 years old or whatever, and at the time I was just getting into Iron Maiden and the new wave of British heavy metal. So it's absolutely correct. The pace of Stormbringer, and I think it's true of a lot of his 60s output, it's fast, rhythmic.
It is
built to a pattern, and it comes in rushes. And that's what I loved about heavy metal, and that's what
which is
and that's why that appealed
artistic.
to me. And I think Warlord of the Air is very, very similar in the way that's constructed as well. Kind of picking up on all these new characters, and you've mentioned Hawkmoon and Corum. I think much as I loved Elric, I think I loved the Elric stories because of that heavy metal. For me, Elric's associated with prog rock, but for me, the Elric stories are Diamond Head and Iron Maiden and that fast-paced rush of visceral descriptions of battle, and with the interesting characters, with the psychedelic elements kind of thrown in for good measure, and with a really complex, unusual protagonist. And when we get onto the... Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, I remember your first podcast, you guys laughed about Elric's description in all his Technicolor glory. There's nothing goth about the outfit he's wearing. It's awful. It would make Colin Baker blush.
Yeah.
It's so colorful, and I think that shows Mike's mindset. It was Technicolor. It was Jimi Hendrix. It was this crazy level of over-the-top bright music.
Yeah.
And that's why Elric was so bright. Now, for me, with the gold covers, I think the music was, in my head, much more dark and depressive. Susie and the Banshees, probably. My wife and I met at a goth industrial nightclub. So for me, my music background leans more towards the goth. And Elric was very goth. But that's more the gold covers than Mike's descriptions. Mike's descriptions are very colorful.
Yeah.
But then maybe the contrast of an albino, in the U.S. we pronounce it albino, the contrast between an albino hero and a black sword created these monochrome covers that I don't think was what Mike was envisioning.
No, the Robert Gold covers, Elric is very still, very regal, very pensive.
Yes.
Whereas I had the Grafton Stroke Panther covers with Michael Whelan, where for the most part he was not
very
particularly well dressed,
right?
but colourful. Generally showing his thighs off and parts of his chest. Yeah.
Yes.
So that kind of that massive gothic take on Elric. Yeah, it doesn't. It's more about the tone of Elric's character rather than certainly the visual approach to Elric's character or the visualization.
Well phrased.
Yeah, it's really interesting that once again, if we go back to his impact on the fantasy genre, not just Moorcock but Elric himself. I've had some commissions done by an artist called Clint Langley.
You've shown those on Twitter.
Yeah, and he's a very well known 2000 AD artist. He's done a lot of work for things. He's done work for Warhammer, for Black Library Comics. He's created the visualization of really, really popular characters within the Warhammer universe. And the most popular one, when I spoke to him the first time I met him at a convention, he said he just based him directly on Elric. And I was the first person who'd ever asked him to do an Elric commission, and he was absolutely delighted to do it. So it's that influence is just shot through everything. It's shot through music, it's shot through art, it's shot through, more contemporary, I suppose, fantasy fiction. You know, it's no accident, I don't think, that the Targaryens in Game of Thrones have platinum hair and rode dragons and engaged in slightly dubious relationships with their siblings or cousins.
And that's where people don't know where this comes from. If you talk about Law and Chaos, people think Dungeons and Dragons, but D&D took it from Mike.
And I think, to be fair to Gary Gygax, in his Appendix N, he did at least directly acknowledge.
But nobody,
unlike
nobody
some other
reads
people
the appendix.
who perhaps picked that stuff up further down the line.
Yeah, nobody reads the appendices anymore. And so Gary acknowledged that, but after Gary, people forgot where the source material came from. And that's not just, Conan has been reasonably popular. Certainly in the U.S., Arnold Schwarzenegger very much popularized Conan, and Kevin Sorbo as Cole. But Conan
suffered the same depredations as Elric, hasn't he?
He did. Conan is just a thug. He's a thug with a sword these days.
He's a thug in a fairy nappy.
Yeah.
Who doesn't wear clothes or armour. He just runs around in a fairy nappy and punches camels. And that's
well phrased.
That's the pop culture picture
it is.
Of Conan, and it's so far removed.
It is
from the material.
I came to Robert Howard rather late, and then was stunned with how intelligently it's written. I expected Hulk smash, and instead got the single most philosophical character, and in that I see something that relates to Elric. When you're reading an Elric fight scene or a Conan fight scene, the point isn't the blood. The point is the angst that Elric, that Coram, that Conan are going through. Is this all I'm meant to be? Why is life so cheap? You have these questions of what it means to defend yourself versus take someone else's life. Yeah. You find that in all of these good writers, and that's why I say it's not in a way an escape. Michael Moorcock is not light reading. Conan by Howard is not light reading. Now, later writers cheapened it to Hulk smash. Conan wades through a sea of bodies, gore everywhere. He rescues the princess. We're done. And that's what the movie, frankly, the Conan movies felt like that, because you didn't get the internal monologue. But that internal struggle is what I love so much about the older writers, and we've lost so much of that in so much modern fantasy. Without question, I think one of the best things, it's Mike's nonfiction. It's London Peculiar. It's Into the Media Web. It's his book with James Cawthorne, 100 Best Fantasy, that let you know, it reminds you what fantasy used to be, and then what fantasy should be. And so when he talks about J.G. Ballard or China Miéville or any number of other writers and tells you this is why these are superior to so much of the schlock that's still out there, you can see, I mean, he argues you through it and you're reminded what the purpose of fantasy was. And it's not that you can't read escape novels, fanfic, generic Doctor Who, Star Trek, Magic the Gathering, vampire novels, whatever. There's nothing wrong with those, but they don't fulfill the same function that Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse or Elric, Conan, that these novels did more. They pushed things more. It wasn't pure escapism. Mike sucked me in. I went to him for escapism, and then he taught me lessons on humanism that changed my life and changed how I see the world. And I love him for that. And I didn't even know it was happening. I can't imagine what I would be like if I hadn't read, what has he written, 100 books now? Something like that. Nearly 100 books later, or whatever the number is, that has changed me profoundly, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, I think that's a really good note to end this discussion on.
Sounds good.
It's been absolutely great to talk to you, and I hope we do it again. When
you're ready, when time comes down, I'm up for it. But I also, life is life. We'll see where we're at in 2021, right?
Absolutely. Thanks. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Happy birthday to Michael Moorcock and Phil. Many happy returns.
Happy birthday!
Away, foul imps!
By the beard of Odin. Your wonderfully, gorgeously hirsute other half Andy tells me it's your birthday, Phil, and you share it with the big man himself. So, without further ado, it's me, Nis. I'd like to wish you happy birthday, and a happy birthday to Mr. Moorcock. And here's my halfling with a little message for you as well.
Happy birthday, Phil!
You take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Massive thanks for those last greetings to Clarky and the Imps. Apparently also Wallace's greatest skiffle group of the 1950s, I hear. And to Nis and Inaya. Phil is really delighted with that, Inaya. The most energetic birthday greeting she's had, putting me to shame. And thanks to all of our contributors on this show. The Pastor, Simon Perrins, Robert Macmillan, Jim Kirkland, Hussein, Nathan from Coram, check out his Bandcamp, Ralph from the Fixed Plasm podcast, and to Lord Samper. As a result of that wonderful message, I now formally declare December the 18th the official birthday of Breakfast in the Ruins. It's fitting, really, as we had a lovely present this week in the shape of the show reaching and exceeding 10,000 downloads. And as ever, massive thanks to all of our patrons, including 2 new ones. Graham, joining our troupe of Jugaderos, and, emerging from the stuff of chaos, Joe Monty. Graham dropped us a line to say, I got into Moorcock when I was in my early teens, 30 odd years ago. via a friend of mine who also got me into RPGs. He was into Hawkwind and thought I'd be into Moorcock fiction. I then got really into playing the Stormbringer role-playing game. Wish I still had the rulebooks, they go for a small fortune these days. Over the years I've been devouring his books. I have a soft spot for the Oswald Bastable series of stories, and I also love Behold the Man and The Black Corridor, which are quite different, I feel, to his fantasy works. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Graham. Graham, as it happens, is a purveyor of fine folk music and sea shanties. Check out his gear at duckpondsailors.bandcamp.com and also on SoundCloud. So, thanks as always to our Chaos engineers, desperately trying to avoid Brute of Lashmar's appalling Christmas baking without upsetting him. Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Van Ness, Fred, Dave, Jim, John Lays, John Watt, Nelbert, Simon Perrins, Robbo, Mal Pertwee, and Ben. And to our Swish and Svelte Jugaderos, all cheating at cards really badly because they're all fucked up on Advocaat lemonade. Clarkey, Craig, Loz, Matthew, Randall, Steve, Tom, Ian, Mark, Alex, and of course Graham. And to our patron demons, Master Paconti, Lord Norman, Baker on the Rocks, The Lapsed Gamer, Dreadmort Men, Sir Neil of Burton, The Destiny Knight, Robert Paragraphus Pandemonium Macmillan, and last but not least, to new arrival, Joe Monty. Thanks for all of your support and the great conversations we've had. It's been a really weird year, but this experience has been overwhelmingly positive and a source of great therapy. You know, along with buying too many books that I don't have time to read. Phil and I, and all the gang in Team Ruins, wish Mike a happy birthday, and we wish you and all of our listeners a very Merry Christmas and a fabulous New Year. Finally, as I mentioned briefly in the intro, I'm delighted to be able to showcase the work of Chaos Engineer Dave, aka singer-songwriter and multiple instrumentalist, Cernus. Now, interestingly, the O in Cernus has an umlaut, which means I can deliberately pronounce it Hull style with merry abandon. Cernus. Dave dropped me a line about his debut release, Worlds Undreamed Of. Hey there, well, finally I have it, the fully mixed and mastered EP. I've just released it on Bandcamp, and it's coming to every other streaming service on the planet soon, thanks to DistroKid. The song, The Eternal Champion, deals with a lot of the common themes found in Moorcock's Eternal Champion stories, such as lamenting the warmongering, pointless brutality of the human race, as it strives to dominate the Earth in an entropic universe pulled apart by two opposing forces. Narratively, the lyrics and the vocal delivery are meant to convey Dacre's internal monologues in verses as a sort of detached, cold droning, before his consciousness regains control and he interrupts with impassioned pleas in the choruses and the middle verse. I have to say, Dave, this kind of stoner, acid-drenched noise prog is right up my street, and you can find Dave's gear at sonusrocks.bandcamp.com, and he's on Instagram as sonusrocks. The full 9-minute glory of The Eternal Champion by Cernus will play us out in a few moments. Right, that's about it from me. Gerard Arthur Connolly remains on his mid-season break, but he'll be back next year when he'll experience the smells and tastes of the mysterious Baker on the Rocks. Before I go, don't forget you can follow and gab with us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle at Breakfast Ruins. You can email us, breakfastruins@outlook.com. The blog is at breakfastintheruins.com. We have our Patreon page too, and we're out there on most podcatchers. If you do have a favourite and we're not on it, drop me a line and I'll see if I can sort it. But meanwhile, stay safe, and I'll see you soon on the Moonbeam Roads.
of